It looks pretty good.
Have you ever just had an idea that buzzes around in your head and won't leave you alone until you drop everything else and make that idea a reality? I'm Shannon Makes, and that, my friends, is precisely what happened the instant that somebody told me that this tool was called a Tailors Ham. They said ham, and my mind went handprint fabric.
Ham textured fabric.
Unfortunately, however, there is no such thing as handprint fabric. Trust me, I've looked. I have the targeted ads to prove it. But that's where my admittedly questionable skills with Photoshop come in. Fortunately, the stakes have never been lower. The plan is to create some digital ham texture, then send it off to Spoonflower to be custom printed. By the end of this video, we should have a full meal of sewing tools worthy of Instaham. The artwork actually ended up being more of an undertaking than I had originally assumed, because not only is there no such thing as handprint fabric, but there aren't really even good images of that classic honey-baked ham texture. I needed a flat 2D representation of that iconic diamond pattern, and I thought I could just find a chunk of an image and then repeat it a couple times and that would be enough. But the only images that I could find were too curved and shaded, and the texture was distorted. They just didn't translate well to a flat surface. So I set out to create my own custom ham texture from scratch. It was off to my Big Mac to cook up some artwork. For those of you who aren't familiar with what exactly a Tailors Ham is, they are these nifty little pillows that are very tightly stuffed and used to press curved areas of clothing such as darts, collars, cuffs, or corsets. An ironing board is great when you're pressing flat seams, but sometimes when making clothing, your seams are curved, and then what do you do? Well, for the past 3 decades of my life, I got away with rolling up a bunch of towels and making do. So for those of you that don't have a Tailors Ham, don't worry. I certainly wouldn't rank it as an absolute necessity. However, it is a convenient and, hopefully by the end of this video, amusing tool to have in your sewing kit, and I do have a corset project coming up, so now seemed like the perfect time to finally make one. This process was surprisingly tricky, but eventually I was able to create a few individual ham motifs that I then repeated in a diamond pattern on top of a lighter texture background so that the resulting image looked pretty sufficiently like a honey-baked ham. With the texture created, I could move on to the overall shape. Most of the ham patterns I found were asymmetrical, but I wanted mine to be ambidextrous, so I created a shape that was symmetrical and resembled a traditional Tailors ham, but modified slightly to accentuate its hamminess, which included adding some room for the bones on the end. It was roughly around this time, as I was fine-tuning the overall shape, that the thought struck me. I might as well make a sleeve roll too. This tool, as the name implies, is most useful for pressing seams in narrow spaces such as sleeves or pant legs, and is often called a tailor's sausage. And most of you out there can probably see where this is going. Shannon, no more meat puns, I'm baking ya! I know. I'm the literal worst. Just stick with me and we'll press on. And speaking of pressing on, those of you that aren't subscribed yet, consider pressing that button and joining me for future sewing and linguistic hijinks. The sausage proved much easier to create thanks to a wealth of high-quality images, so the biggest challenge proved to be choosing between merguez and kielbasa. Once I had the meats prepared, the next step was laying them out on the fabric using a template provided by Spoonflower and arranging them in the most efficient manner possible. This task was made difficult by the fact that I needed to lay everything on the bias so that the fabric would stretch sufficiently around the curves instead of puckering. Several Tetris games later, this was the arrangement that I came up with, which, as you can see, left me with lots of small gaps of blank fabric. The genius of this next idea belongs to Katie of Latina Living History, who suggested filling in the spaces with pineapple pincushions and maraschino cherry emery balls, an idea which I thought was absolutely brilliant and immediately brought to fruition. Unfortunately, making a separate 3D cherry as an emery ball seemed beyond both my patience and sewing ability, so I combined them all into one big pincushion, complete with the cloves that usually hold the pineapples onto the ham. This was uploaded onto Spoonflower and the fabric was ordered. Alright guys, guess what just arrived in the mail? This is my fabric. It's finally arrived, and while I am not the sort to necessarily do the unboxing type video, I think you guys should be here with me on this one. So let's open this puppy up and see how our ham fabric looks. Alright, so I see this, which is for a separate project, so we'll just set that off to the side. Gorgeous as it is not for this week's video, so that can go over there. Moment of truth, guys. Let's open it up and see. Does it look like ham? Oh, if this isn't the absolute definition of ridiculousness, I don't know what is. It looks, oh, it looks pretty good, guys. The color is not quite as rich as I was hoping, but then again, that's always kind of an issue with this sort of printed type fabric. So I think honestly, the sausage and the pineapple look delicious. The ham looks 95% good. It could use maybe a little bit more vibrancy, but I'm pretty freaking stoked. I think it looks great. Let's open this up a little bit further. It's pretty much exactly what I hoped it would be. Ham textured fabric. All right, so I'm going to take this, I'm going to throw it in the washer on high heat and in the dryer as well, again on high, because I want, if there's going to be any color bleed happening, I want it to happen now as I wash it so that it doesn't bleed when you're trying to, say, steam iron on very high heat, say a white silk corset or something of that sort. So let's try and get any color bleed that's going to happen now, and then we'll reconvene and talk about what we're going to do for the other side. Next was a trip to the fabric store to find some matching wool for the underbelly of these meats. Once appropriate colors were picked out, all of the fabric was washed several times to make sure any color bleed would happen in the wash and not on my future sewing projects. I'm going to be using 2 layers of fabric to make sure that my filling doesn't burst its casing. And so besides the printed cotton and the wool, I'll also cut out 2 pieces from some scrap fabric I have laying around. I mainly want it to have a tight weave and to be a natural fiber so that it doesn't melt under the high heat of the iron. Now it's time to make a ham sandwich. This gets pinned together and stitched down, making sure to leave a section open so that you can fill it. I graded my seam allowances, and then the whole thing was turned right side out. The same process was repeated with the sausage. Now it's time to stuff our meats, and there are plenty of things you can use. Sawdust is a traditional filling, but you can also use cotton polyfill, natural fiber scraps from your cabbage patch, or even walnut shells. Anything that can withstand high heat without melting. I chose to use wood shavings because they remain firm and don't compress with use, and fortunately a kind neighbor gave me enough sawdust to fill a whole deli counter of these guys. The key here is to pack the sawdust in quite tight to make sure you have a firm ham. So I went bit by bit, adding a small amount of sawdust, pounding it down firmly, adding some more, and pounding some more until the whole thing was stuffed to the brim. The next step is maybe the trickiest, sewing the whole thing shut and making it look decent. I could have sewn the 2 layers all in one go, but I didn't want to risk it, so I closed the inner lining first, letting my stitching be as ugly as necessary, and then once the stuffing was safely contained, it was a bit easier to close up the outer layer neatly. The pineapple went together pretty swiftly. I used felt sheets as stuffing because I was afraid that polyfill would give me an oddly poofy pineapple slice. Once the felt was cut, the sides of the pincushion were sewn to the top, then the stuffing was inserted and the bottom was sewn on by hand. Before we sit down to dinner, I want to thank you all for watching. If you like this style of content, please subscribe and ring the bell if you like notifications. And if you decide that you too would like to bring some linguistic humor into your life, or you just have excellent taste in sewing tools, I'm happy to announce that you can purchase a kit for yourself over on my Ko-fi. At the moment, I have kits that come both with and without the wool layer, although I can't guarantee that that will be the case by the time you're viewing this, so hop on over to my Ko-fi account, the link is in the description, and check out the options if you or a fellow sewist you know might be interested. If you're watching this as part of CoSy and you're collecting badges, you can find the link for that in the description as well. And now, let's see what's for dinner. I am tickled pink with the way these turned out. This project has been on my mind for so long now, and to finally see it all made up just makes me so happy. The fact that it's absolutely ridiculous looking only makes me love it more, and I can guarantee that these silly tools will be getting lots of use in future projects. If you make one for yourself, please be sure to tag me on Instagram at @makingseamsmeet. Thanks for watching, enjoy the rest of CoSy, and I hope I'll see you in my next video.